This is an image of Dr. Edward Edinger's diagram of the psyche in Jungian terms. And so just to remind you of it for purposes of understanding soul and anima and so on. Here at the top we have three egos, three separate egos. One is a man, one is a woman, and one is a neutral ego. And from each of them projects the shadow. That's the triangular darker area. And the self is the bottom half circle. That is the deepest archetype in the unconscious. And it's also called the God image, the transpersonal self. Dr. Edinger also talked about it as the greater personality, quote unquote. And the two half circles just above it are Animus and Anima, which we'll be starting to talk about tonight also in The Secret of the Golden Flower. But the point is that the self peers out from the unconscious through the lens of either anima or animus, depending on whether we are male or female, or at least have a masculine or a feminine preference, out toward our ego. And remember last week I was talking about individuation and how each of us is individuating. In other words, the force is coming out through you. This is why this video that I was watching earlier this evening is interesting, because what Brian Swim was talking about was the fact that everything in the world is actually symbolic of things that were within us at one time. And consciousness is coming up through our psyches, but from ourself out toward our egos, and then it gets converted into buildings and cities and paintings and diagrams like this one, and so on. That's how civilization is created by humanity. And that's the significance then, going back, of this first quote that I mentioned on page 35 of volume 1 of this book, where it says, "We are still looking back to the Pentecostal events in a dazed way, instead of looking forward to the goal the Spirit is leading us to." Also, this comment, "His religious teachers and leaders are still hypnotized by the beginnings of a then new aeon of consciousness instead of understanding them and their implications. What one once called the Holy Ghost is an impelling force, creating wider consciousness and responsibility, and thus enriched cognition." This is obviously a very different way of looking at history, and it's one that I think would be very interesting. If I were a younger man, I might take up a PhD in history, only to go back and do a thesis on that topic, because it's really fascinating to me. Okay, so I'm going to be referring now back to this image, which is the fourth stage in The Secret of the Golden Flower. So in this image, the adept is imagining five other adepts, and each of them is imagining 5 other adepts. So there's 25 adepts in total in these images. And what they represent is different complexes within the psyche, which a Taoist adept understands to be illusion, and therefore what he's doing is, among other things, if he has a problem, he's trying to look at his problem from every direction. So in this case, he's looking at the 5 adepts, and those may be different people that are involved with his problem in one way or another, and he's trying to spread that out farther even by imagining what the problems are that that adept is facing in his psyche. And what Dr. Jung's point was that as long as you can collapse these things and recognize that they are illusions, everything is hunky-dory. But if you can't collapse them, their autonomy may be symptoms of schizophrenia. And so this is what he said. I'm not an expert on this area, but I just wanted to mention that before I get into these notes. And okay, so now I'm going to share my notes. And so he was talking in paragraph 47 about fragmentary psychic systems that either appear spontaneously in ecstatic states and evoke powerful impressions and effects, or else in mental disturbances become fixed in the form of delusions and hallucinations, and consequently destroy the unity of the personality. So you can't play with these things as if they're a toy. They're not a toy. What I was talking about earlier in terms of the Red Book, of course, the Red Book is a 5-year-long visioning process that Dr. Jung was undergoing, experimenting on himself. And I have done a lot of active imagination, and it is done by entering a kind of meditative state, a state where you're basically doing what a Buddhist adept or a Taoist adept or perhaps a Hindu adept would do in meditation. And what happens if you're able to achieve that meditative state, and that might require some training, is that then things start to present themselves in your psyche, and it becomes a kind of drama within your psyche, and entities approach you which you can converse with and learn things from. And so in Dr. Jung's case, at one point he was conversing with a snake, for example, and as we know from Genesis, even Eve was conversing with a snake at one point. So that would suggest that kind of active imagination, even referring back to biblical times. In paragraph 48 now he's saying, their autonomy can be observed in daily life in effects that obstinately obtrude themselves against our will and in spite of the most strenuous efforts to repress them. They overwhelm the ego and force it under their control. For example, marital strife is one example where these autonomous entities can really cause havoc in your life, as they did in my life 30 years ago when my first marriage collapsed. Even in the law, they're considered temporary insanity. Such contents have a disintegrating effect upon consciousness. Okay, so that's cheery. But if you know that they exist, at least you can learn how to consciously address them. Paragraph 49, fragmentary psychic systems can't be described as pure and simple. They have a character of persons, found especially in mental diseases, psychogenic splitting, or mediumistic phenomenon. This week I did a discussion of the bad deal that I made with the devil on one occasion, or Actually, it was a good deal in my estimation, but in any case, one of our subscribers questioned the deal I made. I think the name of it is, Why Did I Make Such a Bad Deal with the Devil? And I explained that the psychogenic Mephistopheles that appeared in my car next to me 20 years ago came up instantaneously. I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. And it came up at 65 miles an hour on a dark highway. And so it wasn't a question of approaching the issue rationally. And instinctually, I made a Faustian bargain with the devil. And that turned out to be the right answer because it caused the devil to be gone. And he's never come back in the last 20 years, thankfully. But it was instinct. It was my unconscious producing this autonomous entity. And it was another part of my instinct, a separate part, that caused him to be gone. And so these are not things that we necessarily can control. These things sometimes occur in the phenomenology of religion, obviously, because the devil is one of those creatures that sometimes does appear. So many of the earlier gods developed from persons into personified ideas and finally into abstract ideas. Activated unconscious contents always appear at first as projections upon the outside world, but in the course of mental development, they are gradually assimilated by consciousness and reshaped into conscious ideas that they forfeit their original autonomous and personal character. People left behind by American society have nothing to lose. So that is a reference. Let's see, volume 7 of the Collected Works of C.G. Jung, paragraph 395, he's talking about people who have some sort of emotional thing going on for whatever reason. But here's what Dr. Jung said. On psychological grounds, therefore, I would recommend that no God be constructed out of the archetype of the monopersonality. In other words, we must not be concretized, for only thus can I avoid projecting my values and non-values into God and the devil, and only thus can I preserve my human dignity, my specific gravity, which I need so much if I am not to become the unresisting shuttlecock of unconscious forces. In his dealings with the visible world, a man must certainly be mad to suppose that he is the master of this world. Here we follow quite naturally the principle of non-resistance to all superior forces up to a certain individual limit, beyond which the most peaceful citizen becomes a bloody revolutionary. Our bowing down before law and order is a commendable example of what our general attitude to the collective unconscious should be. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Thus far our obeisance would not be too difficult, but there are other factors in the world to which our conscience does not give unqualified assent, and yet we bow to them. Why? Because in practice it is more expedient than the reverse. Similarly, there are factors in the unconscious with regard to which we must be worldly wise. The children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Ergo, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So I'm just making an observation about American society. Paragraph 50. Instructions to the dead in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Don't take these shapes as truth. Don't confuse with the pure white light of truth, the divine body of truth. Christians are warned. Don't be blinded by the illusion of a personal God. Okay, so that's a personal God that's watching over whether you can make your touchdown. at the football game or not. There is no universal puppeteer that's out there making sure that we make our touchdown. We have to get that from ourself, from our heart. Paragraph 51, tendencies toward dissociation inherent in the human psyche. If not so, fragmentary psychic systems would never be split off. That is also the reason why our time has become so utterly godless and profane. We lack the knowledge of the unconscious psyche and pursue the cult of consciousness to the exclusion of all else. Our true religion is a monotheism of consciousness, a possession by it, coupled with a fanatical denial of the existence of fragmentary autonomous systems. But we differ from the Buddhist yoga doctrines in that we even deny that these systems are experienceable. For example, X makes me crazy, whatever X is. So many people want to believe that there is no psyche, and that simply can't be true, as we all know. So, our time has committed a fatal error. We believe we can criticize the facts of religion intellectually. We think God is a hypothesis that can be subjected to intellectual treatment, to be affirmed or denied. We completely forget that the reason mankind believes in the demon has nothing whatever to do with external factors, but is simply due to a naive awareness of the tremendous inner effect of autonomous fragmentary systems. This effect is not abolished by criticizing it, or rather the name we have given it, or by describing the name as false. The effect is collectively present all of the time. The autonomous systems are always at work, for the fundamental structure of the unconscious is not affected by the deviations of our ephemeral consciousness. Paragraph 52 then, if we deny the autonomous systems by a critique of the name, the devil, for example, the effect continues, but it can no longer be understood, nor can it be assimilated into consciousness, i.e., what happens if you deny that the devil exists? They become an inexplicable source of disturbance, which we finally assume must exist outside of ourselves. This leads to collective delusions, incidents, revolution, war, in a word, to destructive mass psychoses. So, isn't that cheering? Anyway, moving on. Paragraph 53. Insanity is possession by an unconscious content that, as such, is not assimilated to consciousness, nor can it be assimilated since the very existence of such content is denied. Paragraph 54. Huiming Ching says, shapes formed by spirit fire are only empty colors and forms. This is what I was saying about the adept in the fourth image there, that those are empty colors and forms, and we need to remember that they also can go away poof. But what we have left behind are only verbal specters, not the psychic facts that were responsible for the birth of the gods. The gods have become diseases, phobias, obsessions, neurotic symptoms. All we have to do is turn on cable news to know that the disorder of the brains of politicians and journalists who unwittingly let loose psychic epidemics on the world. Paragraph 55. Right means in the hands of the wrong man. Instead of allowing himself to be convinced once more that the demon is an illusion, we ought to experience once more the reality of the illusion. He should learn to acknowledge that these psychic forces are new and not wait until his moods, nervous states, and delusions make it clear in the most painful way that he is not the only master in his house. His dissociative tendencies are actual psychic personalities possessing a differential reality. It is not a matter of indifference whether one calls something a mania or a god. To serve a mania is detestable and undignified, but to serve a god is full of meaning and promise because it is an act of submission to a higher, invisible, and spiritual being. The personification enables us to see the relative reality of the autonomous system and not only makes its assimilation possible, but also depotentiates the demonic forces of life. When the God is not acknowledged, egomania develops, and out of this mania comes sickness. Paragraph 56, yoga meditation takes acknowledgement of the gods as something self-evident. The veil of Maya cannot be lifted by a merely rational resolve. It requires a most thoroughgoing and persevering preparation consisting in the full payment of all debts to life, as the German and Japanese people discovered in World War II, when the debts could not be paid until all of the crockery was broken. To me, this is a pretty profound area, and it relates to things that are happening in our own politics today. I leave it to you to decide what, but the point is that we do have some manias afoot in our society, whether you see the world from the red side or the blue side, and we need to understand ourselves and understand better how we can control those, and I don't feel that we do now. At least that's my opinion. I'm going to continue on just a little bit farther. So part B of this commentary is about Animus and Anima. Paragraph 57, Animus, that which we have received from the great emptiness, that which is identical with the primal beginning, Logos. Anima is sensuous desires and impulses to anger. So what he's saying here is that Animus is the Logos, which when human beings started to become conscious and started to create symbols in the form of words, we were able to begin to develop civilization. That's what we did. And that's what we're still doing. We're able to convey our ideas across time and space. And so Dr. Jung's ideas and thoughts are still with us today. He's still conveying them because we're talking about them this evening. And that is the Logos. However, we all need to understand how this experience that he was undergoing actually plays out in our lives, because our mental health relies on it. Not only our personal mental health, but the mental health of our families, our societies, our countries, and the whole human species. In paragraph 58, the Chinese make clear anima, affective states, are immediate experiences. Why aren't they called just moods? Effects have an autonomous character. Most people are under their power. They can be personified. If you're moody about something, you can have an active imagination where you talk to literally your animus or your anima, as the case may be, and discuss why you are having that mood. A person roused by affect does not show a neutral character, but a quite distinct one. Example is, okay, the example I have is my wife because I know when her animus is pushed. If I criticize her in any way, oh my God, her animus will come alive and she will come after me. And this is actually her animus speaking.